Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today, and it is our Millennial Round Table. We're going to be talking about lots of different issues, and of course we have around the round table Nick Pitts and Allie, Beth Stuckey, and of course Nick Pitts about ready to be Dr. J. Nicholas Pitts, and I've been reading about how teaching Nicholas was the Pitts, and so I've learned more about your teachers than I can't even remember my own teachers, and you have told us all about teachers. You're up to the 8th grade now, right?
Oh, yeah. So it's really fascinating. So I've recognized that I'm going to be walking across the stage on May 11th, but the only reason why I'm walking across the stage is because so many others have contributed and shaped and been a part of my life to be able to get me there. And teachers, more often than not, you can never overappreciate them. There's no such thing as showing too much gratitude for teachers based upon everything that they do. So what I decided to do is I've been in school for 23 years, and so 23 days before graduation, I've been highlighting one teacher and just teaching, kind of just sharing some moment that I had with them or some lesson that they imparted to me. And so over the past, I'll go for the next 23 days. I'll make my way through every single teacher, and I think it's a pretty clever little hashtag. Teaching Nick was the Pitts.
That's right.
So there it is.
And it's the pictures that really
the pictures are
amazing.
smiling.
The little soft smile.
Yes.
You love
That
the
little
no-joke
Nicholas.
smile.
Yeah, how could these teachers not just love little Nicholas?
No,
and
they
love
did.
to protect you from getting beat up.
Oh,
That was
my
a
goodness,
funny story.
Mr. McGee.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. I had my frustration clouded my judgment, and I threw a punch at a kid named Travis in the 6th grade. I completely missed. I like to think because my parents didn't let me play Mortal Kombat. Completely missed. Ended up on the ground in the center of all these 6th graders that wanted to fight, or wanted to see a fight. And all of a sudden, Mr. McGee comes and saves the day because Travis would have annihilated.
Okay, can you give us some insight into what would make Nick Pitts so upset that he would throw a punch? Because knowing you and what I know about you, it's very hard to picture you being that angry.
I am extremely competitive, and we were losing so bad. And it wasn't just losing.
I'll solve this problem, he said.
It wasn't just losing bad on the football field. It was their taunts that got me, because I'm a words guy. And so when you were taunting me, I just had to react. And so I thought I would throw a sucker punch. Completely missed the sucker punch. Ended up on the ground, and I saw this look in Travis's eye. It was like, I'm about to be like a peep in a microwave.
I'm about to die.
Annihilated. But nevertheless, Mr. McGee.
Oh, that's so great. I can't say that I've ever seen you with that much aggression, but I'll try not to, I guess, beat you in a game or taunt you.
Or just be in the car with me on 75 during rush hour.
No taunting, at least at Point of View. We'll find out later. You can read all about it in the Daily Briefing, and of course, we've also posted it here. It's so funny because we've been posting my Viewpoints commentaries, but then every once in a while I'll go to my Viewpoints commentary and it's Nick Pitts instead. So again, and of course we have links to both of your websites. And speaking of that, there is a momentous, where's our drum roll? A momentous occasion that happened to Allie, Beth Stuckey. So Allie, Beth, tell us what's happened.
Yeah, my blog, The Conservative Millennial, reached 100,000 followers, which is, it's followers, I always say this, is not any indication of success. It was just a milestone for me and a goal that I set in 2017. And by followers, I'll be clear too, that's really just Facebook, because that's primarily where my blog lives. And so I kind of measure growth from how many people are actually following me on Facebook. So I reached that, and it was just, a little victory for me in my career path. So
and
pretty excited.
Just for context clues, this was a goal for 2017. It is April 26th, so we still have a little bit of time left to be able to get to 200,000,
thank you.
300,000.
Maybe I'll have to set a new goal, but I do have to attribute, that growth to, of course, Point of View and just the different people who have been able to help me further my platform and speak more about conservative issues. And so I can attribute that to so many other people besides myself and my videos, and it's just been really fun.
You talk about when you first started, there were just a handful of people that were actually on the conservative. Yeah, your mom.
That's basically it. Maybe you, Kerby.
Yeah.
You might have been one of my early followers.
I think was early, but not that early.
Yeah, it took a while for me to get Nick on board. He was really skeptical about me at first, but I think finally in this last week or so, he started following me. But yeah, and so just a piece of encouragement to anyone out there who's kind of like, oh, I'm afraid to put my voice out there, or my face out there, or my opinions might not be popular. It's true. It is really hard to put your face out there. You are going to get criticism on the internet. We talk about trolls on this show. Trolls are real, and the violence is real.
Not to be confused with the awesome movie that just came out, Trolls.
I can't speak to that actually.
Anna Kendrick, Justin Timberlake, the little animated comedy.
We'll have to take a point of view outing.
Oh my goodness! Okay.
To go see that. But anyway, it's worth it. The truth is always worth sticking up for. So just stick to your core values, stick to the truth, and don't be afraid to be bold and get out there and speak the truth. Because I would say a year ago, doing a completely different job, having no audience whatsoever, I never would have guessed that this is where I am, and I've still got a long way to go. But gosh, hard work and being committed, and of course, the Lord's plan for you can really take you places that you didn't think you would go.
And what not a better person for this, right? So just to be able to steward this well. There's some people that can gain a platform, and then it all too often goes to their head, and they start to think they're a little bit bigger than everyone else. And so what not a better person to be able to support as she just continues to speak for truth and to be able to call a lie a lie.
That's very good.
Thank you.
And remember when we first did with this, Nick, she was by phone. Remember?
Yeah, she was.
And then now she's in Dallas. So, we've seen that growth just in the short time you've been a part of this program.
Yeah, she was all the way in Georgia. And remember, I made the joke about the Atlanta Falcons losing in the Super Bowl. That completely fell flat.
Wow.
But I know I'm bringing it back up. I was just trying to bring it back up again, the fact that the Atlanta Falcons lost in the Super Bowl.
To use a biblical phrase, her cadence changed. Her countenance changed.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, my gosh. Well, it's been a fun journey, and now we've got a doctor in our midst. We've come such a long way in the past year, Nick.
I'm trying to think of a good song. I got nothing.
He's just going to make something up.
Yeah.
He's going to put it on his daily briefing. But just before we go to our first break, let's mention something else, and that is people lots of times, Allie Beth, say, where does she go? Well, she goes and actually is on The Blaze.
Yes.
And so that is certainly one opportunity, but this guy sitting next to us here, he's actually been on some of those programs. So talk about what's going on.
Yeah. So just the past couple of days, I've been on The Blaze's show, Glenn Beck's show, rather, Think Tank, and then just trying to contribute in a way that's hopefully thoughtful and considerate, and then gives a conservative millennial kind of perspective on the day's news.
And it's great. He's very insightful. As y'all know, he's very insightful. And I had to warn everyone before he went there. I said, okay, don't be intimidated. He is going to be able to quote anyone off the top of his head. So when he starts quoting and going to a long soliloquy about what St. Augustine said 2,000 years ago, don't be intimidated. It's just what he brings to the table.
As the urban poet Juvenile said, I got it from my mama.
Exactly. So I just had to make sure that people weren't like, okay, this guy is stepping on my game.
Well, one more point I might make, and that is on Friday we had Debbie Georgiadis and Penna Dexter, and we got talking about truth and error. And I said, okay, where's Nick Pitts while we need him? And so I quoted Milton in that case. So I actually put on the Nick Pitts hat just for a moment so that we could get at least one of those quotes in there as well. When we come back, though, we're going to talk about this ruling briefly that this judge gave on sanctuary cities, and then a number of articles we've posted here, whether or not these are snowflakes or whether or not they're really intolerant rioters. A piece by Heather McDonald, who was not allowed to speak there at one of the colleges. Dennis Prager, The Cowards of Academia. We'll get into some of that. And then also a very good piece by Senator Ben Sass on the challenge of our disruptive era. And that's just in the first hour. In the second hour, when Allie Beth has to take off, Nick and I have all sorts of other things to talk about. So we'll get to all those topics right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, every president leaves the next president with unfinished business, but it appears that President Obama has left a number of time bombs to President Trump. A few come to mind. The inevitable collapse of Obamacare is one. Chemical weapons in Syria is another. Perhaps the most significant is what the editors of the Wall Street Journal rightly call the debt interest bomb. Rising interest payments for the national debt will be a major obstacle for President Trump and Congress to overcome. Over the last 8 years, President Obama and Congress managed to nearly double the national debt. What made it less painful was the reality that the monetary policies of the Federal Reserve kept interest rates near zero. That is no longer the case. Peter Schiff has been on my radio program in the past, and he is now predicting that the debt bomb is about to explode. In fact, he thinks the Federal Reserve is going to try to inflate its way out of this problem, but is going to inflate its way into a bigger one. Low interest rates allow the federal government to service its debt, but now much more money is going to be needed to do so simply because interest rates will be higher. He predicts as the interest rates rise and inflation grows, creditors are going to demand a higher premium. This debt interest bomb is about to explode all over President Trump and Congress at the very time they want to reform the tax code and reduce the size and scope of government. If you think about it, we've seen this before. All of us have to look back just 8 years to the housing crisis. Many Americans faced financial ruin because they bought houses they couldn't afford. They were lured by low interest rates, but eventually faced higher mortgage payments. I think President Obama may be glad that he could leave town before interest rates rose. That way he could leave the tab for President Trump and Congress to try to pay. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Millennial Round Table and Allie, Beth, Stuckey, and Nick Pitts in studio with us, and we would certainly encourage you not only to listen to the program, but if you'd like to watch it, of course, it is on and available. You can simply go to our website, pointofview.net, click on that button that says watch. A little bit later, we'll talk about both of their websites. Great resources, highly recommend it, and if you'd like to be one of those 100,000 plus that are part of Allie Beth's, or I forget the exact number, we'll get to that in a minute, Denison Forum, those are opportunities for you to learn from these two individuals. Okay, we had a decision that came down from Judge William Orrick, and he is a U.S. District Judge. This is really kind of the third time in 2 months that you've had some immigration order by President Donald Trump that's been struck down. This one, though, is more disturbing for me, and we'll go around the round table and get your thoughts. First of all, this is a judge that's hardly impartial. And let's face it, everybody has some kind of bias, but this is an individual that has been a major supporter for President Obama. He was a bundler for Obama. He served in the Justice Department under President Obama, and basically in this decision said, you cannot withhold funding for any reason, essentially. And the bottom line is, well, then what did President Obama threaten to do with the transgenders issue? That's one. And then second of all, argued that this, because there really wasn't any standing, nothing has happened. No money has been cut off yet. No community has been declared a sanctuary city. He had to presuppose that they would feel that there would be some harm. So on almost every level, this one violates kind of law school 101. But Nick, tell me what you think about this.
You know, it's very dangerous. What we saw with the nuclear option, right? The nuclear option was exercised X number of years ago by Harry Reid to be able to secure some justices for the Democrats. That's fine if they want to do that. And then they got to taste their own medicine with Gorsuch just a few months ago. And when the rule of law is not stable, we have to recognize that the power players continue to switch back and forth. And we need some sense of stability and some sense of consistency, especially with regards to the rule of law. Hence the reason why we go to such great lengths to make sure that every nuance and every comma and every iota is put in place so that public policy might be projected onto the 321 million people that are living here in the U.S. And so what this judge does, it might be favorable towards Democrats right now, but inevitably what we just need to be mindful of, if you're a Democrat that's cheering this right now, is that eventually, like we all will eventually transition to the next phase.
Yes.
And there's going to be a new judge that comes into that. And will you be reacting the same way if he's on the other he or she's on the other ideological side?
Yes. Allie Beth, what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, well, that's absolutely true. And I was actually thinking about this. So if this were flipped around, if a judge said, no, Obama, or no, Hillary Clinton, I'm not going to do what you say because I think it's unlawful, it would be so much more difficult for me to stand up against that and say, you know what, that's not constitutional. You're just making that decision based on feelings, which are all the criticisms that I've put towards this judge. I don't think that there's really that much of a constitutional basis on which he is, freezing the whatever.
Yeah.
What is it? Freezing the sanctuary city executive order. And I think it's emotionally based mostly, but would I be saying that if I were on the other side of it? I'm not sure. And so I don't really have a hard and fast answer for it, simply because when it comes to your own ideology, it's so hard to take yourself out of the bias. And so I completely see why people think that this person or this judge is now a vigilante. However, trying to look at it from an objective perspective, I absolutely think it's more emotionally and feelings based. And like Nick said, it does set a bad precedent for what's to come, whether you're on either side of the aisle.
And that's why he's a judge, right? Like, he's not supposed to take into account his. That's why he dons a black robe, because he himself disintegrates into that moment, and he's just bound by the law. But what he's done is he's not wearing a black robe. He might be physically, but mentally, for our sake, he's just kind of gallivanting his opinion and being able to legislate from the bench, which is just if he wants to do that, he needs to run for Congress.
That's right.
He needs to run for the executive office. He needs to run for a state representative. He needs to run for city council. If he wants to be a judge, then he needs to go by the rules of the law, which are completely contradictory to what he's actually put down.
Let's use Allie Beth's illustration. I came up with one in my head just a few minutes ago, and that was, imagine if you have President Hillary Clinton and you had maybe a couple of cities that decided they would no longer apply affirmative action in hiring in that city. Nashville, Tennessee, maybe Birmingham, Alabama, Memphis, Tennessee, just pick a few like that. And then Hillary Clinton said, well, then we will no longer send federal funds to those cities because you will not enforce the law. I would stand here and say, look, if you don't like affirmative action, go and change the law. But yes, this is the law of the land. And when you decide to arbitrarily not enforce that particular law, we do have a way to get your attention, and that is by withdrawing those funds. And I would, as a conservative, say I would just as quickly criticize the city in that case as I am criticizing San Francisco and other cities by not upholding the law, because it's a federal law that was passed by our legislators.
I completely agree. And one of the things that we just have to be very mindful of is that we are seeing the precursors of almost like a totalitarian state where the strong man's going to win, which this is not what we are. We're not a totalitarian state. We're a democratic republic where we have certain freedoms and rights and responsibilities to be able to work for the prosperity of the common good. And implicit within that is just this understanding that we're going to exercise our rights to be able to vote and to be able to put in individuals that we believe are competent and that we can trust, in order that they might be able to nominate and they might be able to secure these individuals that, one, will make sure that they're creating public policies that are beneficial, and two, putting judges in place that are going to be bound by the rules and the laws of the land.
The other idea is it could be anarchy. In other words, you're having a situation right now where some cities and some states enforce the law, and some cities and some states don't enforce the law. And I was on a program just the other day. Debbie Georgiadis is on her program. You've been on it with her as well. We got talking about this, and I said, this is reaching a tipping point, I think, Allie Beth, because we're getting to a point now where you have so many cities that are saying, well, we just won't enforce the immigration law. You have California, and we have a lot of listeners out in California talking about having a sanctuary state, not just a sanctuary city. And at that point, then you really do have anarchy because you have two sets of laws, some enforced in some states and some not enforced in other states.
Yeah, I think that makes it extremely confusing. And it'll be interesting to look at in a year, 2 years, a few years, how these sanctuary cities and the safety and even the socioeconomic status of those cities compare to cities that are not sanctuary cities and who actually did enforce the law. But going back to what Nick said about stability, I mean, that's what the law is supposed to create. Right. And if you are a judge, you believe in the Constitution. You're supposed to believe in the Constitution. You're supposed to believe in the stability that the Constitution provides. And if you're not protecting that, if you're not perpetuating that, then is exactly what Nick said. Why be a judge in the first place? It's completely going outside of your role. And unfortunately, if you're a liberal judge, you have the upper hand without having to really cite the Constitution because liberals control the language. They control the idea of compassion, of love, of tolerance. All they have to hatred, and then they've won it. Like, that's all you have to say to win a case if you're a liberal. It takes so much more fortitude and so much more effort to explain the conservative position and to say, okay, actually, it's not compassionate to incite anarchy. It is not compassionate to disobey the law and to be apathetic towards the law if it's not unconstitutional. It's actually more compassionate to care for and to protect the citizens, the legal immigrants, not illegal immigrants, legal immigrants inside the United States by enforcing those laws. That's actually compassion and love, but it takes so much more to actually start to take control of that narrative by conservatives because liberals already have it and they've got all of Hollywood, all of the media, and the past 8 years backing them, and conservatives have a hard road ahead when it comes to these what have become social issues.
And these aren't just, and Allie Beth is right, these aren't just political battles that we're fighting right now. This is the law of the land. And so implicit with that hits on all 321 million Americans is that where the law of the land is not abided by, economic instability inevitably follows. And so this is going to start hitting pocketbooks, as we're already seeing in some states and in some cities right now, where there is not the law of the land is not being followed. Economic stability is very close behind.
You know, again, since we talk about millennials and non-millennials, since I'm the only non-millennial here, I can remember a time before you guys were born in the 1970s where at that time President Jimmy Carter said that we would not send federal funds to states that did not impose a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. Which both of you look at me like, this has got to be the craziest thing I've ever heard. But nobody really complained about whether he could do it. They may have complained about the speed limit, but they never complained about that. There was no federal judge say, wait a minute, you can't do this. And even more recently, we have President Obama that said, I would withhold funds from North Carolina unless they implement the transgender bathroom policy. And I didn't see any liberals complaining about that either. But when it's turned around, as Allie Beth points out, and you have a somewhat conservative president, then you all of a sudden have, in this particular case, Judge William Orrick that came in and said, nope, we're not going to let you do that. Actually, he still could do it. We'll see whether that happens over the next couple of weeks. But we're going to come back and talk about what's going on campus. There's a place where we really need to get some millennial perspective, and we will right after these important messages.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Millennial Round Table. And by the way, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. In studio with us, Allie, Beth, Stuckey, as well as Nick Pitts. And last week we did not meet, and so this would be a good time to come back and talk about the issue surrounding Ann Coulter. But of course, we have a much larger list now. We have Milo Yiannopoulos, we have Charles Murray, we have, of course, Ann Coulter, but also Heather McDonald. And one of the articles we posted, which I mentioned the other day and I wanted to come back to, is she is such a very smart individual, and for her to not be allowed to speak is one thing. But then she started kind of saying, why is this happening? Because the argument around the round table we've heard before is that these are just snowflakes. They don't want to hear a contrary opinion. And she quotes from an article that was in The Atlantic a couple of years ago, The Coddling of the American Mind, and came up with kind of a psychological explanation. But she asks a very good question, and that is, if it's risk-adverse child rearing, which is the source of all this problem, then why aren't heterosexual white male students demanding safe places? And her argument is that this phenomenon on campus where the students are protesting isn't so much psychological, although some of that may be true. A lot of it is ideological, and that is that individuals who are conservative represent a threat to their well-being, a threat to their own lives. This justifies kind of rioting out of self-defense. And so I sent that article around to some of you. And Nick, start us off. What are your thoughts about some of that?
Yeah, I think, again, you read The Coddling of the American Mind. I mean, that stayed atop the Atlantic's top read list, like most read lists, for probably like 3 or 4 months. This idea of just trying to create these safe spaces, bring attention to microaggressions, point out trigger warnings, etc. And I think she's on to something here. I'm so interested in is how this is. I'm just trying to figure out the difference between this and then what happened during the 60s, the 50s, and the 60s and the 70s, specifically just because the protests were always a part of that particular movement. But what makes this so different, and I think that's what she highlights so very well, is the sense that there's just I don't know if it's an entitlement. I don't know if there's a narcissism that's just been kind of been a little bit more prolific today. I just find it really interesting. But Allie, you've been on college campuses, right?
She's been interviewing people everywhere. SMU, TCU, tell us what you found.
Yes, and I'm actually going back to SMU tonight. And something that's happening at SMU right now is that professors who believe that this group that's going to Israel and is leading a trip to Israel, I think they're called the Passengers. The Passengers are very outspoken about being pro-Israel. They say, hey, when we take students over there, we want to give them the historical context, even the biblical context of why Israel is significant. And these professors say, oh, this is horrible. We strongly suggest that students do not go. And one of the students at SMU sent me this letter written by a professor decrying the evil of Passengers for taking kids over to Israel and explain to them why Israel is important. So we see this kind of indoctrination from professors all over the United States, even right here in the heart of Dallas, which is not really what you would expect. And so what we're seeing is, I think, yes, they're being coddled, I guess, when they grow up, and probably the helicopter parents, that everyone gets a trophy culture that parents create definitely lends to that. Technology lends to that. But also when they get to college, which is supposed to be a breeding ground of intelligent and productive discourse, which is supposed to be a battle for your mind. It's supposed to be this place where the best idea wins. Instead, they're just getting fed these ideas from largely liberal professors. And I can't say what exactly that goes back to, why higher education is kind of inherently liberal nowadays. But teachers, professors molding young students decide, okay, instead of saying, here are 2 ideas, let them duke out in your mind, or let's take one idea from socialism, one idea from capitalism, and let's see which one wins. They tell students, this is the right way to think. And if you don't think this way, then you're not just wrong, but you're also a bad person.
Yes.
And so it's not just that they're intellectually manipulated when they're in college, but they're also morally manipulated. And then what you get at the end of those 4 years, or even 2 or 3 years, you get these people that think they're doing the right thing by protesting what they call fascism because they've been indoctrinated for the past 2 or 3 years by professors saying this is right, this is wrong. So if you have a group of people who thinks they're standing up for what they think is right, unfortunately, any means can be justified. If they think that they're vigilantes and that they're defeating evil, and that somehow they're modernizing kind of the Holocaust, then yeah, they're going to be thinking that they're doing the right thing, and it's very hard to reason with people like that.
So maybe I'm thinking about it from a theological perspective now. So maybe we've tied our identity so much in our intelligence that's why individuals are so intransigent upon fighting right now, because it really is a battle for my identity. My worth is tied up into my intelligence. And maybe that's the difference between the 60s and what we're seeing today, is the fact that in the 60s, at least there were some mediating institutions like the church and the parachurch ministries that were able to kind of speak into those spaces and recognize that, yes, we should love the Lord our God with all our mind, but you're worth far more than just your good ideas and your witty points. Whereas today, what we've seen is just this drastic movement away from the church, and individuals that aren't, the church isn't nearly as representative on some of those spaces.
You know, in this first article by Heather McDonald, that's the point she makes, is it isn't just that I'm a little bit uneasy, but this is dangerous to me. She talks about, for example, one columnist in the student newspaper at the University of California at Berkeley said, I can only fight tooth and nail for the right to exist. Another one said that this fight was not an act of violence. These are acts of self-defense. I mean, there's enough hyperbole here where there's this idea that if I allow Heather McDonald or Ann Coulter or Charles Murray to speak, my future is really at stake.
Why there's so much. We so quickly respond in the moment when something happens. So, for example, even the deaths, it's like lamenting goes about, or the Southwestern. What we're going to talk about, the Southwestern professors that posted that picture. It's just immediate reactions, and their gut level reactions that more often than not are very visceral, one, and very over and above too. It's just not. Doesn't have a good long-term perspective, and that just myopically consumes us in that moment. That really just is very detrimental.
So how do we reason with people who largely say absolute truth isn't real, it's moral relativism, it's postmodernism, but then you see students at Harvard, they created this school-sponsored guide for fighting transgenderism by saying if you believe in the binary system of genders, if you believe that there's only male and female, they actually said that you are contributing to systemic violence. At the same time, they're preaching that, love is relative, truth is relative, morality is relative, but they obviously believe in truth. You don't create a guide to fight transgenderism if you don't believe that there is absolute truth.
And this, I'm starting to think through this, and because I want to get to something I want to get to something practical in the sense that we can't fall from those on the conservative side and Christian side. We can't fall into the same trap. Just as they're consumed in the immediacy of the moment, we can't be consumed as well in the immediacy of the moment and think that we've got to have the right answer right there and have right action that follows from it. We've got to be people that have a long-term perspective, is what I would say. And I was reminded of that. I was reading over Winston Churchill the other night, and he says that we have not made it this far because we are people that are made of strong sugar candy. That we've got a strong demeanor to us that has the long game in mind. And so we might not win the points, but we know that we win the argument in the end run, because our understanding of what truth is that corresponds with reality ultimately leads to the flourishment and the betterment of society. So it requires us, one, we might not win the point, but we can prove by our actions that we know that we win in the end. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So from a Christian perspective, someone might not believe the Bible and might not believe the grace of God that was exhibited on the cross of Christ. That might be an intellectual argument that we can't win, but they cannot deny the fact that grace has impacted us to such an extent that's caused me to buy you a cup of coffee that you did not deserve. You can't deny the cup of coffee that's right in front of you. And if you want to, I'll push the cup of coffee over and spill it onto you, and then it'll get really hot. Then it'll be a Twitter moment that inevitably will go viral. I'll be that guy, and then the trolls will be on me. Oh, did I go too far in that?
Yeah, okay. But again, what we're talking about is sort of apologetics, and we've had people on like Greg Kokel or Sean McDowell, or even more recently Tim Keller. A lot of them talk about how, back to Allie's question, they in one sense use logic to deny logic. They use absolutes to deny absolutes. So sometimes you have to show them that they have kind of a self-defeating kind of proposition. And so that's one of the reasons we spend some time talking about how to really deal with that, whether you're talking about claims of the gospel or whether you're just simply talking about common sense. And somewhere along the line, common grace and common sense still have to work, even if people deny it.
Yeah, and so again, I think this is where the conservative movement can stand to reason. I know we're about to run out of time. So I think the conservative movement can learn from this in the sense that we can't just identify the wrong, but we've also got to point to the right. And so what Russell Kirk said in 1954 in his book, The Conservative Mind, that we have to continue to revive our moral consciences in order that we might act in such a way that leads to the flourishment of society. That T.S. Eliot said, to redeem the dream, redeem the time. We have a bright imagination that moves forward towards being the solution rather than just identifying the problems.
We may come back in the future, and especially when you and I are just doing the show, we'll do a Russell Kirk.
Oh, that'll be fun.
And maybe a few of the other classics that people, especially the millennials, need to know about. We've got a lot of phone calls. We'll take those right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. School boards in Arkansas were told to stop open for the community the boards represent, but from a secularist group, prayer has not only been a long-standing part of our country's history and tradition, it has at least twice been upheld by the Supreme Court of the United States. And earlier in 2017, the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit gave its approval to school boards opening meetings with prayer. Perhaps these school boards in Arkansas case of Marsh versus Chambers. Quote, it can hardly be thought that in the same week members of the First Congress voted to appoint and to pay a to approve the states that they intended the Establishment Clause of the amendment to forbid what they had just declared acceptable, unquote. County commissions, city councils, and school boards across America, don't be afraid to pray like the members of the First Congress. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Allie, Beth, Stuckey with us, as well as Nick Pitts. And let's go first to the state of Texas, KBJS. And Annie, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, hi. Say, I remember back in the 60s, the early 60s, when they took Bible and prayer out of the schools. I was only 13, 14 years old. But the thing is, where was the outcry at that time, and how is it that even up till now, so few are able to zero in on a rock your radio show? I I'm 70 now, so I listen to it when I come in to take my nap. I come in to
but I don't see how you can take a nap after you listen to all the things we're talking about.
You mean you fall asleep when I'm quoting Russell Kirk?
No.
That's
now
Nick Fitz.
I'm not asleep. I'm on the phone with you.
But let me try to answer your question, because Annie's asked a good one. And even though I'm the oldest around the table, there are some people older than me. And one of them is Jim Dobson. And Jim Dobson pointed out that, we did not have anything like Christian radio in the 1960s or even the early 1970s. So when you had these prayer cases coming down in 1962 and 1963, when you had even abortion legalized in 1973, you just didn't have any of that taking place. And more importantly, you did have the Christian Legal Society, but it was just sort of a professional organization. But on the other hand, you had the left had everything that they needed already. Allie Beth was talking about how much they have now, but even back then they had quite a bit. And I had a friend of mine that was a ACLU lawyer who eventually became a Christian and became a conservative. He said, back in the 60s, we weren't winning that many cases, but we didn't have any opposition. And eventually we started getting some precedents, and then we started winning everything because there was nobody else on the field. If you want to use a football game, running up and down the field, and there's not even anybody playing defense, much less anybody playing offense. Well, things have changed now because, first of all, you had groups like Alliance Defending Freedom established by people like Jim Dobson and Marlon Maddox, the former host of this, and Larry Burkett and all sorts of others, Bill Bright and many of those individuals. Now, of course, you have First Liberty, you have the American Center for Law and Justice. And so in some respects, we as Christians and even as conservatives are late to the game. And that's why now all of a sudden things are turning around. And Kelly Shackelford will tell you, and he'll remind us again on Friday, that they're winning more than 90% of their cases, in part because they're using logic and they're using common sense. But the ACLU for a long time, they had it pretty much to themselves, and the left pretty much had the judges to themselves. And it wasn't until Ronald Reagan began to put lots and lots of conservative justices into the Supreme Court and judges into the federal court that you began to turn some of this around.
So, yeah, I completely agree. First off, though, Kerby, I identify as a 90-year-old man. So I just want you to know that.
I'm glad you're so old.
Okay, I just want you to know that. Second off,
I'll get your cane out here in just a minute.
Is it inappropriate to say trans age? Is that what you are?
Transcendent. No. Okay. But second off, I think Kerby brings up a really great point, and it highlights the power of the institution, right? Conservatives, Christians were both late to the game when it came to the institutions outside of the church.
Very true.
And so what we saw within the 70s and then 80s and to a large degree, the kind of the intellectual seeds were sown from a conservative standpoint in the 54, is you see that individuals not only just wanting to bring about change, but also wanting to come together to form coalitions and alliances in order to consolidate that power, in order to leverage it to such an extent that they're building up new institutions, but they're also using their power to be able to influence the institutions and power structures of the day. There's a guy named James Davison Hunter wrote a book called To Change the World, and his thesis is that the culture doesn't change from the bottom up, but rather from the top down. Well, from the top down, what you've got to recognize is that these are institutional heads that are bringing about the changes necessary.
Yes. Allie Beth, any thoughts about this? Because, again, some people are just saying, what about these judges? Is there any way we can rein those in? One obvious answer is, of course, Kelly Shackelford was not with us last Friday, I should say, also was not on the radio program we did on Sunday. And that's because he's been helping them actually vet these judges. And President Donald Trump has 123 vacancies in the federal judiciary right now, in addition, of course, Neil Gorsuch. And you put some of those individuals in there, that does turn things around, doesn't it?
Well, vetting is definitely a pragmatic way to kind of help this cause. But from our perspective, or from our place, just your everyday average person, it's kind of hard to say how you can be a part of the solution rather than just being that voice of reason among people in your community, because that being an influence for truth actually has more of an effect sometimes than, the people that you hear on the news and even politicians. But just being able to be that person that says, okay, we're going to be advocates of the truth more than we pledge allegiance to any party, any politician, any judge. And if we had more people willing to do that, more people willing to concede in certain arguments and say, okay, I'm wrong on this point, you're right on this point. It seems far removed from something like the judiciary, but it's actually not, because it perpetuates a culture of reason and of logic rather than only emotions. And if it really just starts with you, and if it starts with the individual, that's the one thing I would say. Let yourself be someone who, even outside of your spiritual life, but is ruled by truth and by logic. And if that is something that can go viral and that can really catch fire, that would be my one thing. People who are willing to actually fight for truth and even able to say that the truth exists.
Having a culture of reason ultimately is going to affect the judges that are there right now. I mean, some people are going to rule according to their whim, and we've already talked about one judge, which I think is the poster child for this right now, and that's Judge Orrick over there in the San Francisco area. But most of the time, judges kind of feel where the culture is going, and if we can change the culture, that's really important. And frankly, I've always said culture is upstream from politics, or politics is downstream from culture. Just again, think this through. Even if you could elect everybody you'd want to elect to the Texas legislature and the Tennessee legislature and the New York legislature and everyone you'd want to get in Congress, would that change a lot of the culture? No. Hollywood would still be the same way. The Academy would be the same way. So obviously, we have a much bigger responsibility than just trying to elect a few people to office.
Yeah, and I think that's what Hunter highlights in his work, right? So gay marriage was approved and accepted during the Bush presidency. During the Reagan presidency, no-fault divorce was put forward. Now, they didn't have any hand in that, but it just shows you that there's very limited power within their office. And so it's yes and amen. The culture does change from the top down towards these institutions, but that shouldn't hinder us or inhibit us from bringing about the change necessary. And that's what I love about conservatism, because you have individuals like Edmund Burke that was talking about the little platoons that go out into the communities to be able to bring about change. And so what is your little platoon to bring about good, positive change in your community? Is it the Kiwanis Club? Is it the Rotary Club? Is it the church? Is it kind of adopting a mile in your local kind of infrastructure and street? It's just bringing about that little bit of change and recognizing the truth that from a Christian standpoint, if it's done in faith, it's never done in vain.
Might just say the third article there is by Senator Ben Sass, and he talks about that, and we'll get into that in the second hour. Even though Allie Beth has to take off, let's just real quickly mention that you can go to theconservativemillennialblog.com, or you can go to your Facebook page, and again, Allie Beth, what will they find when they land there?
They will find videos of me either being myself or making fun of liberals. And it's just a lighthearted way to make a point. I'm not trying to be mean, so don't write me an email about how I should be nice, please.
Well, Shakespeare, right?
And
Jesters
some
do
other
oft
links
prove
too. So we can also see you on Fox and Friends and a couple of other things as well. So that's there. And again, one other thing, just before we run out of time, real quickly, and we'll spend more time talking about this in the second hour. But Nick, again, people can go to the denisonforum.org for information too.
Yeah, so you can sign up for the daily article, which is our principal Jim Denison writes a column every morning, or the daily briefing, which is a survey of the news from a biblical perspective.
We're going to say goodbye to Allie Beth, and
So long.
just the two of us without any adult supervision.
Watch out.
Oh,
That's going to be
Watch
dangerous.
out.
We'll take a break, and Nick Pitts and I will come back and take some more phone calls right after this.
Does point of view make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as district health director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with point of view? Jeremy Dyes of First Liberty represented Dr. Walsh, and in February, the state of Georgia paid a large settlement for their religious discrimination. And Jeremy Dyes became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty, greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View Radio as a child. That is the kind of difference you make when you support the Truth Team, but we can't make that difference without your help. Become a partner today in this important mission of speaking truth in love. Join the Truth Team at pointofview.net/team. Choose your giving level, stretch a bit, and please do it today. Or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team. or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today in studio with me, Nick Pitts, and we're going to spend some time working our way through some of the other articles we've posted and get into a couple of other issues, but we have some calls left over from the first hour. So let's go first of all to South Carolina, listening on WAGP. And Dennis, thank you for calling us today here on Point of View.
Hello, thank you for taking my call.
Sure. I think you want to educate us on a few issues, so you have the floor.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to educate anybody, but I heard Allie, Beth Stuckey say she didn't understand why things are the way they are, why education has gone the way it's gone, why these college professors are the way they are. And I think if you remember back to when you were in grade school, you were taught what the Age of Enlightenment thought about, how people are, this new way of scientific way of looking at life. But you weren't taught any balance to that. We were taught to be in awe of science. We weren't taught to be in awe of God. And that's the train didn't come off the tracks. The train just switched tracks somewhere along the line, where people weren't thinking in terms of themselves with God. They were thinking in terms of themselves with science. And I believe that came about during the time of John Dewey and progressive education, where he was a very militant man. He's called the father of modern American progressive education. He's the father, and we're his children. He said that if it didn't impact your senses, it wasn't real. And he was a co-author of the Humanist Manifesto.
Yep.
This guy laid the tracks that our educational system is on.
Well said.
And I'm saying this one man's name. I know it's not one man, but neither is Karl Marx. But people, associate communism with Karl Marx. I associate where our education system has gone with John Dewey, because he's a figurehead, but he's not alone. But anyway, that's what I believe.
Well, and I think you've done a very good job. And over the last couple of days, I've said that some of the programs we've done here on Point of View are kind of vintage Point of View. When Marlon Maddox was here, we would have whole programs on humanism, or we'd have whole programs on education. And he mentioned John Dewey. I could mention Horace Mann and the so-called Frankfurt School and some of the rest. John Dewey and some of the others were the signers of Humanist Manifesto 1. Then later, of course, we had a Humanist Manifesto 2. But it's not by accident, Nick, that when we look at American education, it was very much influenced by individuals that had kind of a secular, humanistic, naturalistic worldview. And so over time, even though we had Christian teachers and had Christians in the schools, nevertheless, when you take all of the curriculum, all the education and the education departments and kind of the philosophy, not surprising that today we end up with this kind of secular philosophy that is really part and parcel of all the universities and a lot of the public schools.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So when I think about John Dewey, it's often synonymous with pragmatism, right?
Yes.
Just what works in the time being. And so what works, we never want to be so high-minded that we can't be too earthly good. And so there's a role and a place for understanding the practicality of the ideas and to be able to say the implementation. But to get rid of the ideology and to get rid of the understanding understanding and the thoughtfulness and the rationality and jump to the pragmatic, whatever works right here in the moment, is just does disservice, and we're bearing some of those repercussions right now. And we can see this just within college campuses right now, as they're increasingly moving away from institutions whereby there's thoughtfulness and training of the mind, the intellectual curiosity that meets aged wisdom of the day, and now very much just turning into almost like an indoctrination, or just turning into cog-making factories, where you just have individuals that are learning how to do what we used to consider on-the-job training, now are turning into college campuses, where college campuses have traditionally been is, let me teach you how to think, and let me try to shape you formatively in a cognitive sense. Now we're moving into, let me tell you how to make this widget, which is just very unfortunate.
Yes. So, Dennis, I appreciate that, because you've kind of forced us to get into a conversation we're going to have in just a minute, one of the articles by Senator Ben Sasse that we've posted. But again, John Dewey, progressivism, are kind of the secular mindset that has been part of American education. And so we shouldn't be surprised that then when you have institutions where then most of the leaders or most of the faculty heads are liberal, then they only hire those who are liberal. They tend to weed out those which are conservative, and we have the circumstances that we have today in the American educational situation. So, Dennis, thank you for calling today. I appreciate that.
I think what we need now is we need a John Dewey that's a Christian. We need another leader. We need another father.
Well, we also need some people to go along with it. Part of it is we're so fractured Christian-wise, you know. Mm-hmm. I do see that there is a really positive movement on a lot of these college campuses. Nick, you're about ready to graduate from with your PhD at DBU, but I'm going to be speaking at a graduation Friday night at another university here that's a Christian university, and we've talked with people that are at places like Wheaton or at John Brown, or certainly we can talk about those that are even on the East Coast, Gordon College. We've talked with the president there, on and on and on. There are just a number of individuals that might be at least part of a coalition of those that would bring back a resurgence of Christian scholarship.
Completely agree. So Mark Knoll came out with his book, The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind, back in the early 90s when that came out. And so his premise was the scandal of the evangelical mind is that there's not one.
There's not one. Or Harry Blimmer's before that, the Christian mind, in which, again, he said there's no Christian mind.
And so even despite the fact that our God has called us to reason together with one another from Isaiah 1:18, our God has called us to seek after wisdom from Proverbs 2:4, like that of silver. Our God has called us to renew our minds so that we might not be conformed to the patterns of this world, to have the same mind that is of Christ Jesus from Colossians 3. And I think we're starting to see some semblance of that. The wake-up call in the early 90s from Knoll, now to what you were mentioning, Kerby, just the Gordon colleges, the Wheatons, the Dallas Baptist universities, just some of these institutions that are catching a glimpse of what does it look like for the Christian not to be weary or not to be shyful towards the truth, but to really wrestle cognitively with the truth in order that they might be able to exercise excellence in whatever field and discipline they're in.
One other thing I might just mention just before we go to a break, and that is, if you look at a lot of the Bible colleges and Bible institutes that were established in the 19th century, most of them went liberal or just simply went out of existence, oftentimes because they were liberal. And if you look back, there's only a few that survived, and it was like Moody Bible Institute, or the Bible Institute of Los Angeles, known as Biola. There were a few that survived, but most do not. And that's the sad reality in higher education, whether secular education or Christian education. Over time, they all tend to generally go liberal, and there's only a few exceptions, and those exceptions are based upon a firm understanding on the part of both the faculty and the president to try to stay true to God's word.
Yeah, so theological liberals do not have grandchildren, and that eventually there comes the time they don't have anything to pass down because they've questioned away everything. And so it's just, the missional drift is kind of what's been associated with it, to make sure that you have the right people in place.
We have a lot more to talk about, but we have one of those mandatory breaks. The second article we've posted here by Dennis Prager, The Cowards of Academia. I thought I'd talk about that for just a minute. Then we'll get to this piece by Senator Ben Sasse, The Challenge of Our Disruptive Era. Some really good things to talk about with Nick Pitts right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, every president leaves the next president with unfinished business, but it appears that President Obama has left a number of time bombs to President Trump. A few come to mind. The inevitable collapse of Obamacare is one. Chemical weapons in Syria is another. Perhaps the most significant is what the editors of the Wall Street Journal rightly call the debt interest bomb. Rising interest payments for the national debt will be a major obstacle for President Trump and Congress to overcome. Over the last 8 years, President Obama and Congress managed to nearly double the national debt. What made it less painful was the reality that the monetary policies of the Federal Reserve kept interest rates near zero. That is no longer the case. Peter Schiff has been on my radio program in the past, and he is now predicting that the debt bomb is about to explode. In fact, he thinks the Federal Reserve is going to try to inflate its way out of this problem, but is going to inflate its way into a bigger one. Low interest rates allow the federal government to service its debt, but now much more money is going to be needed to do so simply because interest rates will be higher. He predicts as the interest rates rise and inflation grows, creditors are going to demand a higher premium. This debt interest bomb is about to explode all over President Trump and Congress at the very time they want to reform the tax code and reduce the size and scope of government. If you think about it, we've seen this before. All of us have to look back just 8 years to the housing crisis. Many Americans faced financial ruin because they bought houses they couldn't afford. They were lured by low interest rates, but eventually faced higher mortgage payments. I think President Obama may be glad that he could leave town before interest rates rose. That way he could leave the tab for President Trump and Congress to try to pay. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Millennial Round Table, and if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me say again, thanks to Dennis for reminding us of John Dewey, and of course I had mentioned some others, Horace Mann and the Frankfurt School, and all sorts of things that we will probably get back to again. Where did we actually, in terms of public education, take a wrong turn? And more importantly, how do we find our way back? But while we are talking about some of these issues, the first article we talked about is what's happening on campus. These snowflakes have a chilling effect on the campus. But I also posted one by Dennis Prager, The Cowards of Academia. And I thought this was really striking because what he did was point out that you can find all sorts of statements being made right now, Nick, by various faculty members. And first of all, I don't want to overplay that because one of the things he said is the number of professors, administrators, and deans that have signed some of these statements are small. But okay, let's give credit where credit is due. Mm-hmm. They actually say we stand for free speech. But the point is, he says, they're all just feel-good gestures. They really have no impact. And this is why until we start putting some of these students in jail, at least the rioters in jail, and expelling some of these students, this is going to continue, isn't it?
Yeah, there has to be some type of discipline, right? So we look at Middlebury College right now and what's happened at Middlebury, and there still hasn't been enough disciplinary. I'm almost sure there hasn't been any disciplinary action that's been done.
Because Robert George each day posts his little Twitter about, it's been 45 days since, whatever.
And I mean, regardless of whatever your ideological background is, there were literally students and individuals that sent a woman to the hospital.
That's right.
Like this can't happen. This can't happen in the U.S. We're better than this, right? That's a part of the great American experiment. It's this idea that we have competing ideologies and competing views, but we can talk about these things in a manner that we don't have to get uncivil, because we're a civilization. And what's just so unfortunate is that we have individuals that are, like we're saying, that at the idea of cowardice. And so I continued to go back to Prager, and then I was thinking about cowardice, and then I was thinking about courage and the Aristotelian understanding of courage being that with which we understanding what not to fear. And we shouldn't have to fear these just competing ideas and ideologies, because at the end of the day, truth always wins out.
Well, again, what we see here is that these statements are not going to necessarily change behavior. I love what he says at one point. These statements are not going to cause one of the rioting students to say, wow, I've really been acting like a fascist, rioting and shutting down non-left-wing speakers, but now my eyes have been opened and I'm going to stop. Not happening. And if nothing else, reminding us once again that one of the more cowardly places on the planet are universities. And you've seen this before. You've been to 3 different colleges like I have.
Yeah, so statements require reading. Reading requires reason. These students obviously are not acting with reason right now. And so there's got to be the disciplinary action. And discipline has negative overtones. Yes, there is a negative sense to discipline simply because you were enacting some type of punishment and some type of physical or emotional pain upon you. But inevitably, if we go back to a biblical understanding and even just an implicit humanistic understanding, discipline reveals that we love. We understand that this is not the fullness of life. This doesn't lead to flourishment. And so we need to bring about a discipline in order to correct your way, in order that you might be able to experience more of life as you move your way along the way.
Well, again, we talked about what's happening on college campuses, and we've posted a couple of articles, but I wanted to move to another one by Senator Ben Sasse, who's been on the program once with us before as a candidate. We need to get him back on as a senator. And he looks at this from a historical point of view, but one of the things he talks about is we are moving from a disruptive point of view. He's even got a little diagram from an individual that's got a pitchfork to somebody that's got a hammer or a wrench, and then somebody that's got looks like an iPad. And the point is that really we are moving into a disruptive era, and it relates back to the millennials, because he said what it really means is that jobs are no longer permanent. It used to be that you did whatever your parents and grandparents had done, but that is no longer the case, and that's one of the challenges facing the millennial generation. True?
Yeah, I very much so. And so we know the statistics for millennials and their job hoppingness. Now, to a certain degree, it's not because the technological innovation is keeping them from holding the same job, but rather it's just their own fickle nature of wanting to be able to jump from job to job. Average millennial will have 7 jobs before their age of 30. And so it's this understanding, though, from Sasse's article, and what he just highlights so well is that technology and innovation are rapidly expanding at such a rate that you can't just work at your job for the rest of your days, because eventually the robots are going to come. Eventually artificial intelligence is going to come. We are very replaceable. And so instead of trying to squelch technological innovation, we just need to assume a more of a learning posture. Now, we've already seen a little bit of this in the American experiment so far, in that there's always been continuing education, but we've just got to ramp that up and just take away the kind of mentality that I'm going to be able to keep this job for 50 and 60 years, because that's just not the case anymore.
Well, and one of the disruptions is the issue of opioid addiction. And first I read that Senator Ben Sasse writes about it. Then I read that Nick Pitts writes about this. And he says 10 years ago, on the top 10 list of what you're worried about, nothing even close to prescription drugs was on that. Today, opioids are a major concern. And he says that people are scared about drug abuse in largely middle-aged populations, and this is a symptom of economic disruption. Now, when we've talked about drugs before, Nick, and we've done that, and we're going to do another program, and I've got a chapter in my book on Christian ethics and plain language on drugs, most of the time we've talked about preteens, teens, maybe young adults at the most, addicted to various kinds of drugs, and it can be drugs, alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, heroin, whatever. But now this is certainly a major concern of the middle-aged population, something very different. And you wrote about this just the other day in your daily briefing.
Yeah, so Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimate that 91 individuals die every day from drug overdose. And then they say that number is probably too low. There are estimates of 27,000 individuals that are dying every year from drug overdose, including opioids. And then we think about, well, that's just unfortunate. That's just their own mistake. Well, no, that has a communal aspect to it as well. And so there was some of their research pointed out the fact that it costs the public sector $23 billion a year. 1/3 of that is attributable to crime rates that have gone up. This opioid addiction, and I think one of the individuals that speaks to this pretty well, but in an indirect fashion, is J.D. Vance and his Hillbilly Elegy, of just these individuals that very much are losing their jobs, and instead of going back to work or looking for work, instead they're just kind of lamenting, or they're kind of living in that past, thinking that they're still working or the system's done them wrong. And so what do? They turn to kind of unfortunate substances and abuses.
Well, again, we had Chuck Bentley in the studio, and I forgot to mention that to Allie Beth, because he actually helped her begin to change her direction, which has been successful. Wow. But one of the things he asked me afterwards is, you're familiar with that book, Hillbilly Elegy? And I said, well, yes, Penna Dexter's done a commentary, showed it too. And so there are all sorts of people that are writing about the disruption, and sometimes it manifests itself in midlife crisis, sometimes it manifests itself in drug abuse, sometimes it manifests itself in suicide or massive amounts of depression. But we are going through one of those disruptive times, and for those of us that have a little history background, he reminds us that when we went from the farm to the industry, at one point at the end of the Civil War, 86% of Americans worked on the farm. At the end of World War II, 60% of Americans lived in cities. And you start looking at some of the disruption taking place now, and you can see why you're seeing such kind of dysfunctional families, some kinds of destructive behavior. And this is an opportunity, I think, for the church to really speak to those issues, don't you think?
Completely so. And so one of the things that Sass highlights in his article is speaking to how, yes, there are these disruptions, but communities tend to come in and tend to bring easing, healing balm towards these disruptions.
Right.
You think about some of the transitions that you've been through in your own life, and you recognize that there's always been individuals that have come in and they've been willing to walk beside you, or they've been willing to help you through that. I think that's one of the beautiful things about what happens here in the United States. But what we're increasingly seeing is that individuals don't have those communities anymore. There was a great scare when people were making their way from the farm to the cities, that they're not going to have that same semblance and community and family that they have, but they did develop into those communities. But now what we're seeing is that we're increasingly more isolated. 19% of millennials trust someone else. That means 81% have distrust of someone. And we think about just the distrust of communities. We think about the distrust of institutions. And then even this, Forbes came out with an article that said 1 out of every 2 Americans don't even know their neighbors' names.
That's right.
Well, it's really hard to trust your neighbor if you don't know their neighbors' names. And then you think about that from a Christian perspective. If we're not just called to trust our neighbor, but to love our neighbor, it's really hard to love your neighbor if you don't know their name.
Well, and again, since you mentioned Edmund Burke, let's come back to that, because you're talking about mediating institutions, little platoons, and the church is one of the most significant, and maybe the only one left, because as some of these other nonprofit organizations fade away, the church has a real opportunity, don't you think?
There is more and more isolated people, though social media gives them the faux veneer of being socially connected, and the church has a place to come in and to bring about healing and hope.
Bowling alone, right?
That is so true.
Yeah, well, we're going to take a break. We're going to get into the whole controversy about Bill O'Reilly, but we're going to look at it in a little different way and then talk about a few other very important issues. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour in studio with me still is Nick Pitts, and this is our Millennial Round Table. Allie Beth had to take off, and matter of fact, you were on with some of the programs over there at the Blaze, so we're going to be watching both of you on television here very shortly.
I don't know what you would do to deserve such a punishment to have to watch me, much less listen to me. So
yeah, it's fun to listen to you. And again, you can go to the Denison Forum and find out more of what Jim Denison does. But let me talk about your daily briefing for just a minute. Each day you get up long before the sun is up and actually go through almost Paul Harvey style through some of the stories and identify some of these. And one of those which you identified today was college seniors are falling short. And that comes from the Wall Street Journal. So you could have found it in the Wall Street Journal, but you will also find it in Nick Pitts's daily briefing. And this is of concern because just a while ago we were talking about with Dennis about, first of all, in the public schools, we are getting a secular humanistic ideology. Basically, a humanistic filibuster is taking place in most of the public schools of America. But if that's not bad enough, you might say, well, even if maybe Christians could still survive that, but then we're not educating them. And when you have a third of all applicants that employers report are unqualified, you go, what in the world is going on in college?
You know, that's always one of the fascinating things. So I can understand. Okay, so there's two sides of there's the hard skills and then there's the soft skills.
Sure.
And so hard skills, there's no excuse for colleges, especially colleges that are increasingly becoming more widget making factories, to not be able to train and equip their students to go out and to be qualified immediately for these jobs that they're going. There's no excuse for that.
Yeah.
But there is an excuse though, and I completely see it though. Is that the statistic that was most striking to me is 3 out of 4 applicants failed to send thank you notes. Like my grandmother is cringing right now at the fact you don't send a thank you note, and that's just
after an interview is what you mean.
And after an interview, and so you're
like,
just
please,
so it's just this sense
common
of
sense, common courtesy, anything.
And
where
we just kind of become? And I don't know if it's because technology has increasingly just isolated us and kept us from learning certain social mores and skills, or if it's maybe just this sense of entitlement and narcissism that's kind of popping out among millennials. It's just very distressing when you're not seeing just some of those just easy soft skills being developed. And that might not point back to the institution, but that might point back to the original institution, which is the family. That we're just not teaching children kind of at the dinner table some of those things. I can still hear my dad say, Nicholas, one hand in your lap. Nicholas, slow down when you eat. Nicholas, make sure that blah, blah, blah. Napkin in your lap.
And your mother and grandmother saying, did you write that thank you note? Did you send a thank you note?
Yes, ma'am.
And you're going to be writing that to grandma for the book that she gave you.
Oh, my goodness.
And all those kinds of things. And again, that is part of where you just say, I talk to people every once in a while in HR, and when I do, I mean, story after story. First of all, a millennial comes in with his parents. Really? I mean, you can't even make this stuff up. Or like you said, they come in and with all sorts of expectations and demands, and you just think, what planet are you from? This is an entry-level job. It's a privilege for you to work here, and you're coming in like you own the company. Where did this come from?
It's this sense of, I guess you can, one, you can point back to helicopter parents. Two, you can see just this optional kind of customization and on-demand kind of education that's more often than not been given. And then it's just created this sense of entitlement when you get into the workforce. And in reality, I mean, you can protest it, but at the end of the day, market forces are going to react the way market forces want to react. And so it might hurt you. In a shocking twist, sometimes it takes brokenness in order to come growth and healing. And that's just a part of this experiment that we're living in and amidst. And so for millennials, and I think continue to go back to what Van Jones says, it's not necessarily creating safer places that we need, but we just need stronger backs to recognize that sometimes life doesn't go your way, and it's how you respond when life doesn't go your way that really and ultimately leads to success.
One more I want to pick up here, if for no other reason than you went to this institution.
Oh, boy.
And this is a lesson on what not to do. The dean and faculty at Southwestern Seminary pose as gangsters in a controversial photo. And you're going, what would cause them to do that? Well, apparently they have one of their buddies that loves rap. But I couldn't even believe this. So you have an HTML link, and I clicked on the picture and I go, you've got to be kidding me. This is like a Saturday Night Live skit where they're making fun, except these people honestly
Nobody's laughing.
Yeah, they had. This is right up there at the top of racial insensitivity. Would you not agree?
Very much so. So you just have these. So one particular professor has an affinity for rap or can rap, and so to be able to say goodbye to him, they post this picture. This picture's just completely insensitive. And so, just as a disclaimer, I went to Southwestern. I had one of my professors was in that photo, and one of the individuals that I went to school with during my time was also in that photo. And I cannot comprehend where in their mind they thought this is going to be a great idea and this would be really funny. But nevertheless, they did it. And so mistakes happen, grace abounds, but we just have to be aware of certain things. What was so striking to me that I haven't seen talked about, that I kind of spoke about a little bit, is that this is the preaching faculty. And so preaching.
That's what was getting me, because, we talk about the offense of the cross, even when I'm gracious, even when I worked hard to speak on secular campuses, people would hate me sometimes anyway, because they hate Jesus, or they hate the Bible, or they hate the cross, or they hate God, whatever. Got that. But I learned early on, I'm not going to give them any other reasons.
Exactly.
And when we don't have a level of at least some sensitivity to how somebody could misperceive a way we say it, or how we dress, or a skit we put on, it's not helpful for the advancement of the gospel.
Be persecuted for righteousness' sake. Don't be persecuted for being stupid.
I think that's pretty obvious.
And so, it's just irony of ironies. I mean, at Southwestern, we're very much taught appearances matter.
Oh, I know.
And
the Criswell law. Right?
Yeah, the Criswell.
What do you call it?
The Criswell School Book of Preaching, I think it was. And so you just learn these. You learn these rules, and so you learn that you got to wear it. We always, regardless of whether we were preaching or not that day in class, had to wear a suit and tie. You always had to button your jacket whenever you were preaching. You had to keep both feet on the floor when you were in the pulpit. You had to make sure it was very highly encouraged to wear black socks and black shoes. And so none of this brown fad isn't. So appearances significantly mattered during that time. And then just irony, they quite literally take that just exits once they're out of the pulpit. And this was just a awful, atrocious, racially insensitive kind of picture that they took.
Well, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of a couple of those in the daily briefing. You have, of course, Pope Francis gives a TED Talk ? And a couple of other very interesting stories in here. And that appears every single day. It is one of those must-reads. And so, if nothing else, I appreciate the fact that this boy gets up about 2 or 3 hours before I get up, writes all of this, so that when I'm up, I'm having a chance to learn a little bit more from you every single day.
I thought this was really funny. Somebody told me once a TED Talk was a secular sermon, and I thought that was a really clever way to put it. And so the Pope is just continuing to get outstretched and just admit new and inventive ways to be able to get the message out. And so it's really interesting what he's doing.
You also learn about the fact that President Trump has a Coke button. I didn't know that.
Man, who's jealous right now?
Just push a button and in comes a Coke.
Man, I press a button and more often than not I mess up something.
Yeah. So. Anyway, well, let's get into one other issue. And you and I have been trading back and forth. This is a piece by Ian Tuttle, The O'Reilly Divide. Now, we'll stay away from all this scandal surrounding Bill O'Reilly, but this was, again, something that I thought related very much to our millennial conversation, and that is the older listeners and viewers tend to respond more to individuals, whether it's Sean Hannity or, of course, Bill O'Reilly used to be a radio talk show host. Now he's kind of going back to that, isn't he, with his broadcast, and then viewers. And the younger generation didn't relate as much. And now, of course, he's been replaced by Tucker Carlson. And I would, matter of fact, Allie Beth said just a minute ago before she left, well, I like him. And I'm thinking there is a sense in which certain kinds of broadcasters reach certain kinds of demographics, but it isn't just because of the age, because you can relate to some older people and younger people sometimes can relate to older people. It has to do with the way in which you communicate. True?
Yeah. And so Kerby, I turn the question on you. What is it about your generation that the Bill O'Reillys and the Sean Hannitys, what gravitates you towards them?
Well, and that's what I don't understand exactly, because in some respects, I understand you. There were times when you would just hear some things that would sound insensitive. There would be some things that seemed to me not helping you build an audience that actually might offend. And so I think some people like that. I mean, we had Kirsten was talking a while back about one day he made some comment about, well, I got all the blondes. I can't keep track of the blondes. I can't even imagine saying something like that. But some people think, oh, that's funny. And some of them would used to say that some of the reason Bill O'Reilly got into trouble is because, he's just a fossil. Yeah. But the older generation, they kind of like it. They kind of like their dukes up a little bit, kind of take the left shab or take that one of your friends there. But I think your generation and a lot of us that have some kind of sensitivity to how people perceive that don't react as well. So when we come back, I want to talk about maybe what the differences are, because in some respects, Bill O'Reilly sharpened the differences between the older generation and the younger. Yeah. And we'll talk about that with a millennial sitting across from me right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. 2 school boards in Arkansas were told to stop opening their meetings with prayer. Of course, the advice came not from their attorneys or the community the boards represent, but from a secularist group that just doesn't like prayer in public. We have covered the issue of legislative prayer often on the First Liberty Briefing. By now you know that public and legislative prayer has not only been a long-standing part of our country's history and tradition, it has at least twice been upheld by the Supreme Court of the United States. And earlier in 2017, the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit gave its approval to school boards opening meetings with prayer. Perhaps these school boards in Arkansas should consider the words of Chief Justice Berger writing for the majority in the 1983 case of Marsh versus Chambers. Quote, "It can hardly be thought that in the same week members of the First Congress voted to appoint and to pay a chaplain for each house and also voted to approve the draft of the First Amendment for submission to the states, that they intended the Establishment Clause of the amendment to forbid what they had just declared acceptable." Unquote. County commissions, city councils, and school boards across America, don't be afraid to pray like the members of the First Congress. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and if nothing else, we're spending some time talking about how to communicate effectively. Nick Pitt's with us, and whether we take the story we had out of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary or the story that's here by Ian Tuttle on the O'Reilly Divide, I think if we really can train people for the next couple of minutes, you need to just be careful how you communicate what you say. And there was, as Ian Tuttle points out, a real obvious divide between older center-right Republicans and today's young cosmopolitan right-wingers. And explain that a little bit, because if you're going to really reach out to the millennial generation, as I pointed out, you need to just understand that there are some cultural sensitivities. We're not talking about being politically correct. We're just talking about just basic common sense and graciousness, right?
We feel very deeply.
Yes.
To probably is the best way to put it. Feel very deeply, and we value relationships significantly. And so The homosexual population isn't just the 4% that's out there. It's someone that we know, and that's someone that's probably confided to us that they're an individual that's trying to figure out how to come out to their parents. The Muslims is not someone that's just over there across the seas. It's probably somebody that we grew up playing kickball with, or we played soccer with. And so we're very culturally aware, or we're just deep feelers, and then we're also sensitive towards our friendships and our relationships that we have. And what's interesting is what you see with the divide is you have the Yuval Levines that are a little bit more thoughtful, and then you have the Bill O'Reillys who's thoughtful, but there's just a brashness to it. Mm-hmm. I always go back to the Turkish proverb, right? So that he who burns his mouth with hot milk blows on his yogurt. Yeah. And so it's just this overreaction to a large degree. And so as I think about it, I was telling Kerby in the break, like I'm rereading Russell Kirk's The Conservative Mind right now, and I'm just reminded about conservatism is more than just to the problems that plague us in the present, but rather it's reviving our moral consciences through the treasure trove of wisdom that's in the past, in order that we might bring about the flourishing in the future. It's understanding that the past isn't something to be reacted to, it's something to take in light of as we make our way into a better future. Millennials, largely, from the conservative perspective especially, are much more, I would say, thoughtful, trying to figure out what it is in the past, replicate it into the future.
You know, one of the things we talked about earlier in the week was a piece that we did with Alex McFarland, how the church has failed millennials. Mm-hmm. And if you want to even take it into the congregation, it isn't that millennials are looking for some kind of hip-looking pastor up there in skinny blue jeans using kind of quaint language or even contemporary language. They're looking for authenticity. Mm-hmm. And when an individual is authentic, but at the same time says some things that kind of hurt your feelings or the feelings of your friends in that congregation, they're not going to come back. I mean, if you bring your non-Christian friend in there and after about 3 minutes into the sermon, you're wishing that you had not invited your friend in there, that's a quick way to make sure that you clear all the millennials out there. It's not just your friend won't come back, but you won't come back either, right?
Yeah, so there's a sense that, there's an authenticity that millennials desire, but authenticity cannot be equated with originality, right? So there's just something about being authentic, but it's not necessarily being original. You want to be authentic, you want to be as transparent as appropriate, but then you also want to recognize that there are individuals that more often than not are just wearing their heart on their sleeve. And so while I sense you want everybody to be changing from one degree of glory to the next, is what Paul would say, but you also just want to be acutely aware of the fact that individuals are what C.S. Lewis says, don't judge a man by where he is, because you don't know how far he's come. Yeah. And so just recognizing that we're all on a journey, but millennials tend to be a little bit more sensitive on their journey.
You know, one of the things that also we talked about with Alex McFarland is that a real concern about some of the churches is they're valuing tradition over people. Mm-hmm. And tradition can be very helpful. I mean, it's interesting how many millennials want to go to a church has a liturgy because they do value the tradition. But when tradition keeps you from reaching out to people, or your language or your phraseology or your structures, or your church seems more concerned about budgets than they are about the soul of the individual sitting in the pew, isn't that a problem?
Yeah, so it's so what is the difference between tradition and traditionalism? So tradition is the living practice of the dead. Traditionalism is the dead practice of the living, right? And so it's understanding that yes and amen, there are aspects to be taken from the past that can be replicated into the future. And I think the scriptures are completely filled with that, right? You look at what Paul says to the Romans in Romans 15:3, I've written these things in order that you might be encouraged. He continues to be mindful of the things of the past that have been taught to you from 2 Timothy 3:14. We want to be mindful of the past, but we don't want to be ensnared in the past that we can't be acutely aware in the present. And I think that's one of the beautiful things that millennials are really bringing, is that right now there is this liturgical bent that's happening right now, that they're very interested in Pilgrim's Progress. They're very interested in the Book of Common Prayer. They're interested in high church movements. But we're also seeing that they're also wanting to figure out, how is this relevant and applicable to my life? which is taking a little bit from the past and then trying to figure out how does it make its way into the future.
One other thing he pointed, which relates to exactly what you said, was this idea that sometimes churches choose comfort over cause. If there's anything about the millennial generation, you're a cause-driven society and generation, because you're the ones that have given us See You at the Pole, True Love Waits, short-term missions, Habitat for Humanity. You want to get your sleeves rolled up. You want to get dirty. You want to get involved, right?
Oh, very much so. So millennials very much are the individuals that want to champion what Jeremiah says, right? Jeremiah 29:7, to seek the welfare of your city. We know where to get comfort. We very much prefer convenience and comfort, but the church is not one of those places. We've got the app to be able to do our laundry. We've got the app to be able to find a place to have the car pick us right up beside us. We've got the app to be able to make sure that we can watch our program whenever we want it. The church doesn't need to be a part of that convenience solution. As what Martin Luther says, is we're celebrating the 500th year of the Reformation, that when Christ calls a man, he bids him to come and die. And it's the sense that that God provides comfort, but God hasn't promised us a comfortable life. And the difference between the two is our sanctification.
Well, and again, and since you mentioned that, as we get closer to October, we're going to spend some time talking about the 500 years of the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther, and a few things like that. And I hope you'll join us for a part of that roundtable as well.
I can't wait. I'm actually, so I was telling Kerby in the break, I'm actually heading up to Calvin College here tomorrow. I'm presenting a research paper at the Symposium on Religion and Public Life. And so Luther utilized some nationalistic rhetoric in order to kind of to bring together and unify some of the disparate kind of Germans of the day. And we're starting to see that a little bit, to a certain degree, in Donald Trump. Now, don't tell me, I'm not saying that Donald Trump is exactly like Martin Luther, but I'm saying there's elements of similarities that I'm hoping to be able to draw from that I'll be presenting tomorrow.
Maybe we can post the article, and of course, your dissertation, is it finally approved now? And
it is
done?
Finally approved. So if you need reading, if you need material to help you fall asleep at night, you don't have to purchase Ambien or melatonin. I've got a dissertation that I'll send you for free.
Nick Pitt's in studio with us, and again, if you have not had a chance to join us today, we only took a few phone calls because we had lots to cover. We will certainly do that again. I know that he'll be out a little bit later in the end of May, but that will be fine. We'll certainly look forward to the opportunities for him to rejoin us, but he'll be with us next week. I think Allie Beth will be with us next week, and in the meantime, we'll be watching for you on the Blaze. And don't forget, you can go to the Denison Forum to get some of the great material there, including, of course, Nick Pitt's daily briefing. Let me just mention, just before we run out of time today, that we have also posted my Viewpoints commentary. It's on the debt interest bomb. I'll talk more about that tomorrow, because we're going to get into the possibility of a government shutdown and the tax plan that was initiated today. But we also, of course, are going to have in studio with us tomorrow Johnny Erickson Tata, so we'll cover some of these stories as well as give you a chance to hear from her. But as you go to the website, don't forget there's a place for you to join the Truth Team, and this is just a great opportunity for you to give a small gift or even a monthly gift for as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year. You can be part of that Truth Team, and I would encourage you to visit the website and do so. Let me also thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Does Point of View make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as District Health Director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with Point of View? Jeremy Dyes of First Liberty represented Dr. Walsh, and in February, the state of Georgia paid a large settlement for their religious discrimination. And Jeremy Dyes became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty, greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View radio as a child. That is the kind of difference you make when you support the Truth Team, but we can't make that difference without your help. Become a partner today in this important mission of speaking truth in love. Join the Truth Team at pointofview.net/team. Choose your giving level, stretch a bit, and please do it today. Or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team. Or 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.